So yeah, as Miles was saying, trying to build on Anika's talk more than anything in terms of, okay, how do you go about actually applying and integrating behavioral science, behavioral design in your organizations, within your functions, so you could become behaviorally kind of informed. So just by way of an introduction, as Miles said, I'm the founder and CEO of Peasee. We're a behavioral design stealth startup. And we've been helping companies to better understand, empathize, and change behavior ultimately. And I've been working in the field of behavioral design, behavioral insight science for 15 years, ever since kind of graduating in social sciences. That's what I've done basically my whole career over the past 15 years. And that's ultimately kind of applying behavioral science in product design, experience, service design, anything basically to change human behavior, both customer, consumer, user, or kind of internal employee behavior as well. So I've worked across many industries. To be honest, there's not that many industries and sectors I haven't worked across, for the likes of HSBC, GSK, Haleon, Nestle, Tilda, helping them to apply behavioral science in what they do, ultimately to drive behavior change. So what I'm hoping to do today is share kind of some of the learnings, the hard learnings that we've had, some of the experiences, some of the tips over the past 10 years about how you can go about kind of integrating behavioral science in what you do, and how to get that buy-in, as Miles was talking about, to become more behaviorally informed in your design. So what I'm going to do initially is just take you back, certainly to the start of my career. So as I said, kind of 14, 15 years ago, which makes me feel older every time I say that. And I started my career in an engineering and global management consultancy of about 14,000 employees we had. And I sat in a behavioral insight and design team of roughly about 5 or 6 people. No one paid any interest in behavioral insight or science at that time. Certainly wouldn't have got a crowd like you guys today. So this is before kind of nudge hit the shelves. And our job was to understand people's travel and transport behavior. So basically, where people travel, why they travel there, the routes that they take, the time of travel, anything and everything to do with travel and transport behavior, that was what we had to do. And there's about 5 or 6 of us in the regional office in Liverpool, as I said, kind of in a global engineering consultancy. And every day, I'd get up, take my lunch break, and there's some transport economists and modelers across the way from me in the office, and I'd walk past their screens, and they're basically just using models like this, and I'd say, that looks really interesting. Firstly, it looks a lot easier and more fun than kind of what I'm doing, and I wonder what kind of they're doing, what are these models that they're doing, rather than just playing kind of on PlayStation or whatever it may be. And ultimately, kind of, I dug a bit deeper in terms of understanding what they're doing. And essentially, these economists and modelers were trying to predict people's behavior. And they will wager multi-millions of pounds to predict and forecast people's behavior. And I thought, that's really interesting. If they're predicting people's behavior, surely I can learn a lot in terms of understanding people's behavior. So when I dug a bit deeper, ultimately there was this algorithm sat behind these models. Now, if I showed and shared the whole algorithm with you guys, it would kind of go around this room numerous times. So this is a very simplified version of it. But ultimately, and I'll explain the terms kind of briefly, this algorithm they use to try and forecast and predict people's behavior. So this idea about generalized cost, so that's what the GC stands for. And the generalized cost is the cost to individuals, so it might be your users, consumers, employees. So this is in the transport context, but it can be applicable to anything. And the idea here was in-vehicle time is IVT, out-of-vehicle time, and out-of-pocket cost. So the more time people spent in their cars or traveling, and the more time they were waiting for their vehicles or waiting kind of for the tube or their plane to arrive, and out-of-pocket costs in terms of insurance, tube fares, whatever it may be. The idea that the more time and cost to an individual of the route, mode of transport, whatever it may be, the higher the generalized cost. And the assumption was that people want to reduce the cost to themselves. They want to minimize the cost to themselves, and therefore will pick the cheapest, quickest form of transport, route, whatever it may be. And obviously you can add quality, comfort, etc. to that algorithm. And the idea is based on this premise of understanding human behavior, that we're always trying to make decisions that are in our best interest, rather than kind of so either reducing our cost to ourselves in decision making or maximizing our gain, our utility. So the idea was based on this premise of utility maximization or rational choice theory, that we make decisions that are in our best interest. So really interesting when I started to dig into this in terms of the forecasting and prediction of people's travel behavior. And as I said, it can be applied to any context. And still to this day, even though I've been working in the field for kind of 15 years, many of our partners, this is still a widespread and long-held assumptions of rationality. So when you think about user behavior, it's still very much today kind of that understanding still permeates today. And if you think about that, there are a lot of assumptions that sit behind the algorithm in terms of, firstly, it assumes that our users, or whoever your target audience is, consciously weigh up all the available information, calculate the pros and cons, make a reasoned decision that's in their best interest, and follow through with that intention. So there are a lot of assumptions at play. And it assumes that we have unlimited knowledge as humans, unlimited attention, energy, time, memory, and self-control. So there are a lot of assumptions that sit behind that understanding of people's behavior. And still to this day, those models are kind of multi-millions of pounds are still predicted on those models. If you think about HS2 in the UK, it's still kind of predicting people's behavior based on those things. And that's led to decades and decades of research, experiences, communications, marketing, and experiences and products designed for this idea of conscious reasoning and rational decision-making, that we build and design all these things based on this idea that people consciously weigh up and act in their own self-interest. So what I want to do is just put this to the test and see if this holds true for you guys. So I'm going to play the ultimatum game. Some of you may have come across it. I've played this game for over 10 years, and I did a workshop actually today with the government digital service playing this ultimatum game, and I'm always surprised at how few people have come across this. So we're going to play this game. So there should be a bag of chocolate buttons in between kind of two of you, so I want you to pair up. Quite often when we play this game, people say to me, I've already eaten the buttons, which is a bit of a problem, but hopefully you've still got chocolate buttons in front of you. So what I'd like you to do in your pairings is decide who player one is going to be. Now, player one is going to have the chocolate buttons, okay? The chocolate buttons are yours. You have the bag of chocolate buttons. And you're the proposer. You're going to propose how you divide these chocolate buttons with the other player, if indeed you decide to divide them, okay? Now, player two, you're going to be the responder. You're going to choose whether or not you accept or reject the proposal, whatever that may be. If player two accepts, you split the buttons accordingly to whatever the proposal. If player two rejects, neither of you get any of the chocolate buttons, and I'll take them back to Liverpool with me this evening. And the game is played only once, so there's no negotiation, okay? It should be a really quick, 10-second thing. This is my proposal. Do you accept or reject? So player one, I'd like you just to kind of look at player two and say, I've decided to keep X buttons for myself and give you X, and player two, you just have to accept or reject the proposal, okay? So I just want you to play that scenario out now. So there's 10 buttons roughly, how you divide them with the other player, and I'll see how you get on. So just quickly play out that scenario, okay? Yeah, cool. Okay, so I'm going to come to, just because I know a friendly face in the audience. Lucy, what was your proposal? What happened? What was the proposal, sorry? Okay, two. Okay. So Kate, did you accept or reject? Okay, reject. Okay. Anika, did you?
Didn't have any buttons.
Oh, okay. You guys, what was your proposal?
5 and 5.
5 and 5. Okay. Anyone else with 5 and 5? Okay, that's quite a lot of people in the room. Anyone reject 5 and 5? Okay, so pretty much everyone accepted. Anyone want to tell me any other proposals that they did? 6 and 4, okay. Okay, I could obviously go on for this for quite some time, but obviously I'm conscious of time. But I'm guessing from the show of hands, the majority of you, 5 and 5, 6 and 4, kind of roughly a bit of an even split on that. So I'm going to come back to what that kind of tells us very quickly to put you out of your kind of suspense. Now, flipping on now where everyone is player two, so I want you to assume the real role of player two now. If player one had said, okay, I'm going to keep 9 buttons for myself and give you one, show of hands in terms of how many people would reject that. Show of hands if they gave you one button. Okay, so my best guess is like, what, 80% or something like that would reject. Okay, so if we think about that understanding of human behavior, that people weigh the pros and cons and act in their best interest, which seems fairly reasonable, that people would act in their best interest. Really interesting here that the majority of you kind of said 5 and 5, 60-40, okay? But if you've been behaving in a way that that algorithm suggests, all of you, unless you've got some sort of intolerance to chocolate or don't particularly like it, would have offered 9 and 1, okay? The reason being is that algorithm suggests that you're trying to make the best decision, the best outcome for yourself. So you know that if you keep all 10, the other player is going to reject it and you'll end up with nothing. So the next best thing is 9 and 1, okay? Now, if player 2 was also acting in their best interest, they would accept 1 button because it's better than 0 buttons, okay? But having played this game over a decade, only 2 people have ever suggested 9 and 1 to me, and both worked at Google, so I was really suspicious about what's going on there. Most people do 5 and 5, okay? And most people reject 1 button more than they've got already in terms of 0, and in this case, I'd say about 80% of you rejected it. So, really interesting that, okay, maybe people don't behave in a way that we would expect and in a way that's best interest. So your users may not behave in a way that you'd expect them to or act in their best interest. And there are 3 key things that help us to unpick that, which I'm going to reveal shortly. But the first being emotions, okay? So emotions such as fairness, kindness, guilt. I imagine you went, oh, I'm going to be fair, I'm going to be kind, I'm going to be guilt. I've never met this person before. Do you know what I mean? 50-50. I'm not going to start off on the wrong foot. So emotions often override reason and have a huge implication on our behavior and decisions. And as researchers and designers, they are often overlooked or not given the weighting that they should do. So emotions often override reason and play a huge impact on our choices. The second being context. If I'd paired you up with your friend, children, work colleague, whoever, your responses may be different. You may have kept more coins to yourself, you might have given more away. If we'd done this offline as opposed to in person, your decisions may have different. So context plays a huge important role in our decision making as well. And the other thing, which Anika touched upon, is biases. So biases that we're not aware of, systematic errors in our thinking that deviate what would be in our best interest. So in this case, loss aversion. You might have gone, do you know what, I'm going to give away more because the other person is less likely to reject. So we're often driven by trying to avoid losses, and in this case, chocolate buttons. So interesting that you guys kind of roughly 50-50 split. So another quick game, and don't worry, it's not too many kind of maths questions or too heavy on this, but I want you to kind of think about the answers to these 2 really quick questions. And just a heads up, so I'm giving you prior warning, I'm going to show these questions for like a split second, okay? So I'm giving you a warning, and I want you to be honest with your answers, okay? So, first question, if it takes 5 machines 5 minutes to make 5 widgets, how long would it take 100 machines to make 100 widgets? Okay? Right, I told you it'd be quick. All right, second question, in a lake there is a patch of lily pads. Every day the patch doubles in size. If it takes 48 days for the patch to cover the entire lake, how long would it take for the patch to cover half of the lake? How many days? Okay, so I've got a volunteer for question 1. Any kind of guesses? 5? Yeah. Any other? 1. Don't worry, I've had everything from 0.1 to a million before, so don't worry about it. Any other guesses? Got 5 and 1? 10? Okay, well, I was going to say, to put you out of the misery, the correct answer is actually 5. So well done to those of you that did that. The most common answer that we get, which I'm sure you'll have thought about it along the way, but maybe not said it, is 100. Okay, that's the most common answer we get. Even if you didn't actually think about it non-consciously, it would have come to you. Second question, any kind of volunteers for answers? 47, yeah. Any other responses? Everyone said 47. I find that hard to believe. Okay, so again, well done to those of you who said 47. The most common answer we get is 24, which some of you may have been held back by that. Now, the reason being is that I didn't give you the resources there, the time, a computer, calculator, or to refer to a friend to work out those calculations. So often we're faced with limited resources to make decisions that are in our best interest. And what behavioral science has taught us is we make super fast and frugal decisions in limited time, attention, memory, self-control, etc. So the most common answer to that is 100, because you see 555, 100, 100, you fill in the blanks and it's 100, even if you don't admit it. And the most common answer, 24, is because you see 48 days, half the leg is 24. So the next thing I mentioned is biases and shortcuts. So these three things, which I think is on the next slide, are really important when it comes to understanding and changing behavior. So when it comes to your user research, these are critical that you capture these four things. Without capturing these four things, you're looking at getting about a 5% understanding of human behavior and decision making. Emotions, context, biases, and mental shortcuts make up for as much as 95%, if not more, of our decision making, be it your users, whoever it is, basically human behavior. So it's really important to capture these in your research and also design for them. So these are four key behavioral insights that have come from kind of the discipline over the years. So emotion, as we've seen, often overrides reason, the whole 5 and 5, as we mentioned. And our behavior is extremely context dependent. So our behavior and choices aren't stable. They're dependent on the physical, the social, the emotional, the cultural context, and many other kind of contextual lenses. So when it comes to your user research, capturing context is absolutely key. And that's why when it comes to behavioral research, anything like traditional research methods, focus groups, in-depth interviews, surveys aren't great because they miss context. And also we're prone to biases, as we've seen there, loss aversion, and kind of people take mental shortcuts or heuristics, basically making decisions without consciously thinking about it. And it's these four things that are absolutely critical that when you're trying to understand human behavior and design for it. Now, one of the things that I often tell our partners when we start kind of working with them is that as researchers and designers, we tend to instinctively overestimate the extent to which we think about things. So you think about your users, and it's very easy to fall into that trap of people are weighing up their decisions in terms of their experiences or the products and services and how they interact with them. And we always underestimate the extent to which they make decisions without thinking at all. So I think it's really important that as researchers and designers, we're aware of that and don't fall into that trap that actually many of our users or whoever our target audience is are making instinctive and automatic choices and just being mindful of that. And that's where behavioral design comes in as a tool to help us overcome that, so not to underestimate that. So for those of you that are new to behavioral design, it's quite an emerging discipline and emerging field. It's ultimately the application of those behavioral insights to change behavior, to design experiences, journeys, products and services to change behavior. And ultimately, Anika touched upon it, but behavioral insights, I think the key thing for me from behavioral science, the one big thing take out from me, is that we have these cognitive limitations. The idea that actually our decision making is limited. We're skewed by emotions, context, shortcuts, and biases. And our physical limitations are far more visible and apparent. So as designers and as researchers, we understand our physical limitations and we build and design around it. So for example, this room that we're sat in now, we understand our physical limitations and we design it to kind of accommodate that. But when it comes to our mental limitations, such as that emotions override reason, we're prone to shortcuts and biases, they're not as visible, they're not as transparent, and we're really bad at designing for that in terms of our product design or experience design. So for me, the great big thing about behavioral design is empathizing with our limitations in the terms of the mental limitations that we have and designing for it. They're not as apparent and visible as our physical limitations. And that's the purpose of behavioral design, is how can we understand that and be better at designing it? And ultimately, giving people the opportunity, the motivation, and the means to do the behavior. I know Anika shared with you the Combi model and some other models about the constructs of changing behavior, but ultimately it boils down to how do you give your users the opportunity, the motivation, and the means, so making it easier to do desired behaviors. And that's where behavioral design fits in, really, and the value of behavioral design. Now, I know I mentioned kind of about how do you sell and get buy-in of behavioral design. So firstly, I'm just going to talk through some of the key kind of values of the discipline. So firstly, it gives you such a greater understanding of human behavior, the hidden biases, the shortcuts, heuristics, the context that are hidden from us, and therefore greater kind of 95% understanding of human behavior. So firstly, it gives you far greater, deeper understanding. The secondly, it allows you to empathize with your users, to understand, okay, why they're not behaving or making the choices that we would expect or predict them to do. So that empathy is really important. The next key thing about the value of behavioral design is it allows us to design behavior-changing experiences, communications, products, and services to actually change behavior and have an impact on whatever you're trying to do. So if it's driving user acquisition, retention, growth, sales, it'll help you to change behavior. And also, as kind of user researchers and designers, I'd expect, obviously, that you value measuring. So obviously, behavioral design is underpinned by behavior, so we want to measure what people actually do, not what they say, think, or intend to do, but actually overcome that intention-action gap, or that say-do gap, and actually measure what people actually do. And finally, certainly kind of on the projects that I've been involved in, it drives innovation. You always actually identify kind of previously unseen barriers and opportunities to change behavior as well. So certainly the value of behavioral design is well founded in the lens that it gives you in terms of uncovering those cognitive limitations and designing for it. And as I always say, kind of moving away from the idea that it's a user problem and more of a design problem. Users are behaving in a way because we've designed those services, those experiences in such a way that it's easier for them to do that. So how to get buy-in then? So some practical kind of some tips over the past kind of 10 years about what's not worked and worked. And it'll be interesting to know how many of you are trying to kind of just embark on this journey, getting buy-in and leverage at this moment and where you are in that journey. So firstly, there's clearly an interest in behavioral science. Like for many of you, obviously here today, it's a sellout. So capitalizing on that interest, that's where our journey with all our partners begin, in terms of whether or not you can just actually share and disseminate kind of the latest behavioral science and behavioral design, just to spark interest and attention in the field. So I think all of our work that we do with our partners builds from that interest that there is in this field. As I said, when I first started my career, there certainly wasn't their interest in today, whereas now pretty much everyone's interested in the field. So how you can capitalize on that. What I would say is once you capitalize on that interest, make it really practical and accessible for your colleagues, for your clients to understand. If you think about it, it's practicing what we preach. So certainly when you're more academic or theoretical, it's harder for people to buy in and understand that if you're speaking to your head of UX or head of marketing or whoever it may be, your chief financial officer, making it really accessible and practical is key. And reducing the perceived effort. So Anika shared with you kind of a behavioral design methodology, and on the face of it, it might seem that that takes a lot of effort and time. So we want to reduce the perceived effort and time of applying behavioral design. It can be quick, agile, and iterative to use. So try and reduce that barrier of perception of time and effort. Second, I was going to say, and think about reframing challenges and objectives. So I had a client the other day that said to me, okay, we've got this problem that people aren't using our app. We've designed the app. We expected people would just come now that we've designed it. And actually, people are still using emails and still continuing to kind of use the emails instead of using the app. And they were struggling going, well, we don't know what to do. And essentially, they were translating a behavioral problem, which it is, a behavior change problem, but they don't realize it as a behavioral problem. So try and think about your objectives and challenges and translate them into behaviors is a great starting off point in terms of what are the behaviors that you want or need people to do in order to achieve your objectives and challenges. So try and reframe to make it relevant to whoever you're trying to get buy-in to. Also reveal early adopters. Our kind of who you're trying to get buy-in are also kind of prone to social proof. So if you reveal that other people are also practicing behavioral design, particularly those early adopters and innovators, they're likely to jump on board as well. And highlight the cost of inaction. You're actively choosing not to use behavioral design and behavioral science. So what cost does that come at? It's not like, it's not like you opt into behavioral design, you're actively choosing not to use it, and therefore not to understand 95% of our decision making, not to empathize, not to change behavior, etc. So it's a really important thing to do. And what I would say from experience, the most important thing is find an innovator. So once you do start to share and socialize it internally, there's always someone that kind of innovator, early adopter, and starts to kind of understand the value of it and harness that innovator and work with them to start kind of actually practicing and applying behavioral design. Now, you can do a lot of convincing, and certainly I've written tens, if not hundreds of proposals over my time that have never gone anywhere. And there's only so much trying convincing you do when you get to a point where actually you've got to do first to convince. So we talk about this convince-do loop. And I would say that if you're trying to get buy-in and trying to get traction of behavioral design, the doing is what's going to convince people. Okay, so do first and start small. So you might go, okay, well, how do I go about doing if people don't get buy into it? Well, it can only be like a single figure, maybe like, I don't know, 4 or 5 grand kind of workshop or kind of a pilot project or sprint or some coaching and mentoring to start to understand how behavioral design works in practice and the benefits and value of behavioral design. So I'd say start small and think about the behaviors that are most easy to kind of change and are going to give you the greatest impact. And certainly kind of pilot projects and sprints are great in terms of getting a case study, building some capability, and actually having those project outcomes as well. And certainly kind of where I found most success working with our partners over many years is to share those successes, learnings, but most importantly, to customize and own those different models. So Anika shared kind of the combi model, but what I've seen to kind of gain most traction is when you modify those models, customize them, and make them your own within organizations. So we've developed 2 kind of bespoke models recently for a client of financial services and a pharma client, so it works for them. It aligns with their brand, it aligns with their teams, their UX teams, marketing teams. So customize and own it once you become comfortable in doing that. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is become behaviorally informed organizations. So within your functions and within your organizations, that you integrate it into your processes and practices, which is kind of moving on from a project by project basis. So hopefully there's some practical tips that you can take to get buy-in to behavioral design and start putting it into practice. And some jumping off points then, as I mentioned about translating challenges and problems into behaviors, is just simply asking yourself, what is the most important behaviors that you need people to do or want people to do in order to achieve your desired outcome? So it might be things like, actually, how do we get user acquisition, user retention? How do we improve the customer experience or customer satisfaction? And translate those into specific behaviors that you need people to do. And that's where you'd basically start with a behavioral change statement, as Anika kind of mentioned. So it's a great point to start with and ask, okay, you can't achieve any objectives in the world without changing behaviors. So it's a great way to start. And also, if you're designing products and services and experiences, think about what is it that you want people to be doing as a result of those. And that's a great way, again, to start with a behavior change statement in terms of what are the behaviors that you want from that. And you can do that pre-launch and post-launch. It's a lot easier to do it pre-launch, to think about, actually, how do you design these products to change behaviors or those services to do that. And then finally, another way that you can get kind of start with the behavioral design process is serving unmet needs. So observing what your users do and understand what are the behaviors that they're trying to achieve and what are the behaviors that they're trying to do, and actually facilitate that if it's aligned with your brand and kind of aligned with your objectives as well. And again, start with that behavior change statement. So those are 3 typical kind of starting points that we use with a lot of our partners to start applying behavioral design. Very simple questions to kind of follow through. And what I would say as well is quite often, as I mentioned, we'll have lots of conversations with partners where they're describing their challenges or their business objectives and don't realize that it's actually a behavioral problem or a behavioral challenge. And they just don't think of it in this terms. But everyone in this room is in the business of behavior change. You just don't realize it yet, or you might not realize it yet. But when you translate your challenges and objectives into behaviors, that's when you can start applying behavioral design. So hopefully that's helpful in terms of some practical tips that you can start to use in terms of getting that buy-in to applying behavioral science and applying design in your function and organization. So I don't know if we have time for Q&A, because unfortunately I won't be able to kind of take part in the panel. We've got 1 or 2 questions maybe?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do 1 or 2 questions. I know people do want to get off for some food and some drinks, but we'll take one. If someone's got a question on the buy-in side. We have one up the top.
Thank you. Hi. So the question I had is about the kind of part where you've got an idea, you've got a behavioural intervention in mind. In the same way as you would kind of concept test something, like a product feature or something like that, how might you concept test the idea of a behavioural intervention to understand whether or not it's going to actually address, especially where it's perhaps a habit, so it's something that's going to be a longer term behaviour change, to know that you're going in the right direction?
Yeah, so basically to validate an intervention idea then as quickly as possible. Okay, so what I was suggesting, probably it's not any new news to you, is rather than thinking about actually kind of how you go about designing the intervention, is how do you go about designing an experiment that's going to validate that idea as quickly as possible? And I'd say some of the key things to bear in mind is that we want to measure what people actually do, not what they say, think, or intend. So that's really important. I've certainly been in rooms where people say, that's a great idea, great intervention, nothing kind of ever kind of materializes it from behaviorally. So make sure you're testing what people actually do as a result of your intervention. The other thing is making sure to test it in context. Again, I've designed many interventions that work in one context, but they don't kind of replicate and scale. So I think those are two things to make sure you do. And also, what we're trying to do is learn as early as possible. So for example, rather than developing a new product or service, can you do something like a smoke test and actually get people to sign up to like a waiting list that gives some indication that there's an interest and people want to actually act on that intervention? So what I'd say is probably kind of try and test as quickly and lean as possible to learn early what works, what doesn't work. Make sure you're measuring what people actually do, and that's where Anika mentioned about behavior change statements. Making sure your desired behavior is measurable is really important in the first place. What you don't want to do is get to the point of testing and you can't measure the impact that you're having on behavior, and making sure that you test it kind of in real world context. And if you can do things like smoke tests or like Wizard of Oz or things like that that reduce the time and cost of developing an intervention, I think that's my biggest observation where people go wrong. They think they've got to design the intervention, but actually it's designing an experiment to validate the intervention. And you'll save a lot of time and money doing that. So that's helpful, hopefully. But certainly kind of I can pick that up with you. I've got a bit more time. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Any final question? One more here. Sorry, I saw your hand, but you were too far away.
My question is about the observer effect or Hawthorne effect. And usually when you are, I think one of the biggest challenges in being able to understand behavior is that when you've actually tested it, usually it's in a digital context and you don't know the context in which people have actually done the behavior.
Yeah.
So you might have seen, oh yeah, we get greater click-throughs through a smoke screen, but you don't know what was the real context in which people were doing it because you've launched it live, maybe you weren't able to really observe them. But yet, if you actually observe them, people's behaviors would change because of the observer effect. So how do you actually get a deeper understanding for why people have made the decisions they've made without falling into that trap?
Yeah, great question. I guess it's how you execute the observation and also who your target audience is. So I'll give you a couple of examples and hopefully we'll kind of land somewhere that works. So health and safety, we did some work, this is kind of obviously offline, designing interventions for kind of people that work at height, and we're finding that, well, basically we've got a challenge with lots of people are dropping objects from height and ending up with serious injuries and potentially quite lawsuits, etc. So what we did is wearable eye trackers on the workers. Now, obviously, when you put kind of wearable eye trackers on people, instantly they think about their behavior being observed. But actually, over time, they forgot they were wearing them, and partly because they wear kind of safety goggles already. So often it can be just a matter of time that people actually become at ease or forget that they're being observed. So sometimes it's actually the length of observation that actually people just forget they're being observed anyway and kind of minimizes the impact on behavior. The other thing I would say is things like digital ethnography. I don't know if you're familiar with digital ethnography, but things like that where actually, again, depending on who your target audience is, particularly if they're a younger audience, that's kind of things that they're familiar with anyway, because they diarize basically their life kind of online and using apps and kind of basically the equivalent of ethnography. So I think when we've used digital ethnography, again, give it time, and also we found that it doesn't really impact on people's behavior when they're diarizing their experiences and kind of mobile screen recording and things like that. So I guess, like, obviously you're thinking, well, do you know what I mean? Back in the day, you'd be like in a physical environment observing people and they might kind of change their behavior. But I think it's trying to do it as organically and naturally as possible. And also over time, I've seen the impact kind of basically dropped where people actually don't do that. So it might be that you have a cohort of people that you observe over a period of time, and it actually just becomes kind of the norm or natural. So yeah, I mean, digital ethnography is our go-to for observation. And I would say kind of, yeah, over a week, 2 weeks, kind of like, yeah, it becomes natural, particularly with the younger audience where they're kind of used to like WhatsApp and stuff like that. So yeah, again, I don't know if that's helpful, but I'd certainly say the observer effect, Hawthorne effect, I think is significantly reduced when it's online as opposed to offline, which is more noticeable and more visible. But you're trying to make it just as natural as possible and not, yeah. Hopefully that helps. Yeah. Yeah, I suspect we're out of time. But I will be around if anyone has any questions, and obviously can deep dive into kind of that, yeah, diffusion of behavioral design. Yeah, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Ben. Hands together for Benjamin.